All right, guys. So I came across this clip of Mr. Ibram X Kendi discussing capitalism and racism, right? And essentially, he makes the argument that capitalism and racism are basically like conjoined twins, right? That capitalism is racist, right? And he says that in order to be a so-called anti-racist, you have to be a anti-capitalist. So I want to respond to this ridiculous claim. And before I do that, I want you guys to actually look at this clip in which he explains this really silly concept. Take a look.
That part of the problem of the way we discuss racism is similar to the problem with the way we debate capitalism. You can't separate capitalism from racism. They emerged during the same period and they have long thrived together. But you can't really challenge one effectively without challenging the other. You can't truly be anti-racist if you're not being anti-capitalist. It is not a coincidence that the Western majority white world is also the richest. And the sub-Saharan Africa, by 2030, 90% of impoverished, a hyper-impoverished or extremely impoverished people will be in sub-Saharan Africa. That is not a coincidence.
All right, guys. So there's just so many things to talk about with these statements that this man makes. But first, we got to understand why he's saying what he's saying. So essentially, his argument is that, well, because racism, which, scholars see as a modern day concept, right? That arose during the 17th century with European imperialism, right? That's really how they try to define when the concept of racism, which is defined by them as the belief of superiority, right? Or that a group of people is more superior than another group of people based off their race, right? They say that concept is relatively new and began in the 17th century or so, or around that time. But I'm not sure if I necessarily buy into that. I personally believe that racism has existed for thousands of years, right? I personally believe that, right? He's saying, well, because of that and the fact that capitalism, or at least capitalism in its modern form in regards to the emergence of agrarian capitalism and mercantilism, this began in the early Renaissance era, which was around about the 15th to 16th century. Okay, so he's saying that, well, because the rise in the two kind of happened at the same time, then capitalism is racist, right? That's essentially what he's saying, right? That's essentially what he's saying. That's his argument. And because Europeans, through using an economic system such as capitalism, exploited people in Africa and so-called people of color, then that's also further proof that capitalism is racist. However, the problem with his argument is that, I think he is confusing correlation and causation here, right? I think he's confusing that, right? Just because certain things correlate during the same period of time doesn't mean one causes the other, okay? Because capitalism is a colorblind economic system. That's what it is. It's an economic system, which capitalism is simply just the economic system based off private property and the means of production and the pursuit of profit. That's what it's about, right? It has nothing to do with race. Okay, it has nothing to do with race whatsoever. Okay, and the only color that the capitalist sees is green. Matter of fact, we have empirical evidence of this, of capitalism actually producing what Ibram X Kendi would call anti-racism, right? For example, Plessy versus Ferguson, the case in which Mr. Homer Plessy, a person of mixed race who was primarily white, but had a drop of Negro blood, so he was considered black, okay? He tried to ride on a whites-only rail car, okay? And back then, it was separate but equal. So you had to ride in the rail car based off your race, right? Now, a civil rights group, along with Mr. Plessy, teamed up together to actually challenge this separate but equal doctrine. And guess what? The rail car companies, right, the actual companies supported Plessy in the civil rights group. Why? Well, the reason why is because it would be more expensive for them to operate in a separate but equal capacity, because they would have to pay for more rail cars, right? It actually made it more expensive for them to do business. So therefore, they were against the separate but equal doctrine that was held up by the Supreme Court in one of the worst Supreme Court decisions ever, or that's what historians say. But yeah, that's a prime example right there of capitalism working against racism, right? Capitalism being anti-racist, right? Or that's what Ibram X Kendi would say. Well, who knows? Maybe he wouldn't admit that, right? Maybe he'll just overlook that the same way he overlooks the discriminatory aspects of certain mandates, right, in regards to black people, when he's the same person that says that a policy is either racist or anti-racist. There's no in between, right? There's no in between, right? But when it came to the mandate, he overlooked that to say, I don't know if that's racist. Well, he didn't say it was anti-racist, right? That's just a little diatribe here on this man's silliness. But this same concept, guys, in regards to capitalism, during the Jim Crow South, there were a ton of trolley and bus companies that opposed segregation. Why? Because it was more expensive to have separate cars and separate sections, right? It was too expensive. It wasn't good for the green, which is the only color that matters, right? The profit, right? Which is what I was telling you guys. That's what capitalism is. So Ibram X Kendi fails to properly define what capitalism is. There's no racial component to capitalism. Just because Europeans who happen to be white use capitalism in exploitative ways, and the people they were exploiting happen to be black, doesn't necessarily mean that it is inherently racist. Because again, in a capitalistic society, people that are getting exploited is not based off race. You also have white people that are exploited as well, right? If you count the worker capitalistic relationship as exploitation, the way the Marxists like to define it, right? So again, it doesn't even make sense. Also, on top of that, you have to assume that what Ibram X Kendi wants is communism, right? So in a communist society, then you wouldn't see any racism. However, we have empirical evidence that that's not true either. Just look at China. Look at China and the Uyghurs. That is textbook racism, right? Done under a communist government, right? That embraces a little bit of capitalism, that embraces a little bit of it, but for the most part, communist society, okay? But yet you have Uyghurs, right? Flat out overt racial discrimination. And again, that's not a hyper-capitalist society. The Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union in the early 1900s, between the 1930s, 1940s, they deported Koreans and Chinese people, right? They discriminated against them heavily, right? Pushed them to Far East Russia, deported them out of the country purely based off race and ethnicity. Again, textbook classic example of racism going on in a socialist / communist society, the Soviet Union. So again, there's empirical evidence out there that just absolutely disproves what Ibram X Kendi is saying in regards to capitalism and racism. Okay, that capitalism is inherently racist, because that's just not true. There's been plenty of black capitalists making money off the exploitation of white people, right? Or the exploitation of other black people, if that's what you want to call it. If you want to call it exploitation, that's what you want to call it. There's been plenty of that, right? It's not race-based. It's just based off money, profit. But furthermore, since we're talking about capitalism here, this guy right here, again, he can't, I don't understand how he's even making this claim, because he's not an anti-racist, right? He calls himself an anti-racist, but he's really not. Based off his own definition, right? In order to be an anti-racist, you have to be anti-capitalist. But he's a capitalist, right? He's a capitalist. He sells books, right? He sells books on anti-racism. So he's by definition a capitalist. So if you're by definition a capitalist, how can you be anti-racist? You're not. He ain't selling his books for free, right? He ain't giving no seminars for free. He ain't teaching no courses for free, right? He ain't doing none of the things that he's doing for free. He's charging. Are you giving away all your money? No, you're not, right? You're not giving away all your money. Look at that nice suit he had on. Nice shirt. Getting paid to do speeches. Getting paid to sell seminars and trainings. The whole woke circle is just full of capitalists pushing socialism and communism, right? This dude, I believe he wants to start a department of anti-racism, right? He wants the U.S. government to have a department of anti-racism in which there are no appointed officials. All the officials are experts on racism. They have to be experts on racism. So he wants his woke ideology to be subsidized through a whole department of the government, right, that can implement and affect policies in society, right? This dude is a flat out authoritarian. That's what he is. He's an authoritarian. He's a capitalist posing as an anti-capitalist in order to make money and accumulate power. But for some reason, this dude is seen as some type of heavyweight intellectual, and I don't understand how. This dude's whole academic career, in my opinion, is a farce. It's based off lies and deception. Race baiting, race pimping. That's what this man is doing. So, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.